I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and delivered me from every fear. Those who look on him are radiant. They'll never be ashamed. They'll never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard me and saved me from my enemies. The Son of God surrounds his saints. He will deliver them. He will deliver them. Magnify the Lord with me. Come exalt his name together. Glorify the Lord with me. Come exalt his name forever.
There we go. Good morning. Good morning. Well, we're going to get started here into this class on Job this morning. Before we do, offer some praise and prayer to our God. Anybody have items you want to add for the prayer this morning? Wade Henderson, I hadn't heard he was sick. Thank you for letting us know. Wade's kind of like a Energizer Bunny in the Timex watch. He just keeps on ticking and keeps on marching. We need to check on him. We'll pray for him, though, this morning. Sandy. Sandy Angelo's stomach bug? Or did she go to the fair and eat some fair food? I haven't missed the fair since I was 4 years old, probably. I'll put that in as both. Some news, James Moore had to go like live flight to OU yesterday from Stillwater with some type of brain bleed, and I haven't heard an update this morning, but I'll make sure and put James on. I think I saw that last night too, yeah. Hadn't heard an update this morning. Anybody else have something we need to pray for before we get into class this morning? All right, let's bow and pray and praise our God. God, before you we feel so humbled. We understand your creation from living in it and seeing it, and we see your promises, and we see the way you keep them, and we see your plan for us, and we're just humble and grateful this morning. Here as we look into your word, God, we want to know more about you and know more about how to please you and to walk the way you want us to. The number here that we have on our hearts especially this morning, there's many, but please be with James Moore and Kay and the whole family as they struggle with his brain cancer and the things they're having to do to try and keep him stable. And we ask for relief from his pain and for a healing. Be with Wade and Sandy as they struggle with some things here this week, and we miss them so much. And we understand how much we need each other when one is gone, and that smile or that handshake or that hug is missed. And please be with Steve Parker as he fights his cancer, and the sweet ways that he continues to serve is just a tremendous example to us. Be with Chris as he travels down, both to protect him, but also, God, we ask that he'll see great things happening down in South America for you. The way that your message is universal, it's global, and that in itself is strengthening to us to know that we're not alone. We have brothers and sisters all over this earth that are all walking towards heaven, and we'll all see each other there someday. Thank you so much, God, for the way that you comfort us and help us to understand that as we read the book of Job. We pray things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, this is class 5. We've got 8 more, and I guess, about 40 chapters left? but I've got a plan for that. We saw that video I showed earlier on where the book has it has a prologue and a body and an epilogue. This book is written differently. It is It's the first of the organized books of poetry in our Old Testament. Have anybody in here been reading Job and seen the unusual language in it and thought, this doesn't sound like Exodus. It doesn't sound like, Micah. What's your observation on that?
What I get every time I read it, I start out and I see Job, he's low, and he goes lower, 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 until he starts coming back up.
Mm-hmm.
I see his friends coming there and being great friends,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of turning a little bit.
Yeah.
So what I see is life.
You see,
The way life goes, we have things that happen, and as long as we're like Job and don't lose sight of who our Creator is, it's going to work out.
you see the highs, you see the lows, you see friends acting appropriately, and then inappropriately, and then we get to see the whole picture, the whole thing come full circle, and things work out. The language in it, I remember being a new Christian, and you focus on that little part in the back, that New Testament, and you read the Gospels, and you read those letters, and you start to understand who God is through Christ and through this sacrifice that He's offered. And that other big chunk of the Bible that the pages aren't very dirty on the edges, and it doesn't get turned to as often, seem like, it's like walking through a library and you see all those books on the shelf you'll never read, and you think, well, I probably don't need that. That's something that happened in the past, and then for one reason or another, I remember somebody pointing out to me, almost 40 years ago, that this really probably may have been one of the first books that God wrote down and recorded, even before Genesis. Most people have read the first part of Genesis at least, even if they're new Christians. But I remember reading the book of Job and thinking, it's different. They talk different in there. And I understand more and more that it is poetry. What's different about poetry than regular language? Well, like, I guess, maybe it's sort of such a big question, it's not really easily answerable, but one of the things about poetry is one word has big meaning, right? Anybody ever, when you were little kids, had to write a haiku? A Japanese poem where you write, what was it, 7 and 4 or 7 or something like that? Marcia, it's just, so many syllables per line, and it's boiled down to the essence of, blossom on water, floating, and then shimmer of light or whatever. It's kind of a little bit. You read it and you think, to a grade school boy, it's like, oh, shoot me in the head. This is going to make me crazy. Just beat me and get it over with. Teacher, I'd rather take a SWATs and send me on the playground, whatever. But, each word has big meaning. And if you look at the context of that particular poem, you see deep meaning, and maybe it evokes a memory you have of a fall morning when a colorful leaf lands on a stream and you happen to be in the woods and you hear the peace of the nature. And so poetry is where little words mean big things, and a lot of that's true in the book of Job. It uses what's called non-narrative language and expresses of feelings and thoughts. Are there lots of feelings and thoughts in the rest of the Bible? Some of the books don't have a whole lot. They're more like history. They kind of record things, and there's a little bit, somebody crying out or somebody doing something wrong in there, and it records a few of their words. But Job is just full of feelings and thoughts. Is that easy to handle for everybody? Is that easy to handle for everybody? I see a couple of... You think it's easier? You makes it easier? What were you saying? Maybe makes it easier a little bit. Did I see a hand? Ron.
All the wisdom literature, depending on where you are in your life,
Yeah.
when you read something, I think it can impact you, more as to maybe, you're sitting out and studying, maybe as a student, but then you're going through a particular trial or something in your life, and you read it, and all of a sudden
You get it.
those identity kind of moments, you're like, the light bulb comes on, like, oh, that's what he's trying to say.
Yeah. Ronnie says basically it depends on where you're at in life, and it speaks to you in ways that it wouldn't have spoke to you if you read it a year ago. I remember as a young man when I'd read this, I'd been through some big trauma about this time of life. We were in a car wreck. We skipped out of school, head on, 70 miles an hour, broken neck, broken kneecaps, all of that stuff. And then the year later, I got run over by a dump truck, just crushed. My legs crushed, my ribs broken all over, skin, hide missing. I thought I'd been through tough stuff, but when you're young, you're kind of bulletproof, You just jump back up and say, I got this, And I remember reading, okay, now don't judge me here. You listening? Don't judge me. But I remember reading the book of Job and thinking, what a crybaby. Anybody else ever felt that a little bit when you read the book of Job? Like, oh, he just goes on and on. Quit crying about it, buddy. Just get up and get on with life. I don't care if you got sores on you. You still got some land. You got a wife to take care of. Get busy. That's kind of the way I saw it when I read it. Is that horrible? I'm seeing I got judgmental. Cam, was that your hand? Or Jesse, was that your hand up?
Roddy, when I read it and listen to Job's comments, when all of his suffering boils from his feet to his head, he's scraping them off with a pot's lid, and he's hurting. I'm amazed at the great debate that he has with his three friends, and he's able to give such a response.
An eloquent, poetic response in the middle of being covered with sores.
Job was yearning for death, and to me, physical death is a blessing. I don't want to live on this earth forever. I want to go home and be with God. If Job was ready to go, of course, he is a faithful follower of God. He is ready to go. And so,
Yeah, Jesse points out that Job was eloquent and cogent in the middle of all of this suffering he had, and that he was longing for it. He says it over and over again. Oh, just finish me, whatever. You can use your language on that, but he longs for the grave to get rid of the suffering. Is that kind of a lot, as we age, a lot of folks are a lot more okay with that because you got pain, you got a little pain, and again, no, don't judge me there, but I was thinking, big crybaby, and then as life has gone on, I've seen real suffering, emotion, families hurting. A young couple losing a child, you start to understand the depths of grief, and I still don't know that, I'm not especially good at feeling that with people because I think I'm a little bit of a chicken. I kind of want to run from that. I think, oh, I can't handle that. You know me, I cry easy. So I can, I'm sorry about that with you over there, but I got to go mow the lawn. Is anybody else in the room a little bit like that? So I think God, through this book, forces us. He forces us. He sort of beats us down a little bit in the sense that even if you haven't seen the kind of sufferings Job is seeing, I want you to hear his heart. And that's where those chapter after chapter after chapter of discussion become more worthwhile. They become more worthwhile because I think it kind of prepares you, like in soldiers, they've got to battle harden them, they've got to get them ready to perform a task even when everything in their body's shutting down and the fear has overwhelmed them, and they've got to perform a task on automatic to get a job done. You raise a child, you teach them how to be pleased, thank you, whatever things we prepare humans for in life. I think Job kind of prepares us for a little bit a place to turn if life is difficult. And so maybe I hope I didn't offend you too much, but I still struggle a little bit with wanting to tell Job, I want to be like one of those bad friends who showed up, sat with him for 7 days in silence, but then stand up and say, get up and solve your problems, and let's get better from this. And that's just not right, and it's not what Job needs to hear. It's not what they need to teach in that moment, and it's that some of the tendencies we have in life to give advice are just wrong. So as we read this book of poetry, getting behind a little bit here, the first part, chapters 1 and 2, God, Satan, and Job, first his family and servants and his stuff, and then his skin, his person. The body of the book, chapters 3 through 37, are kind of what I'm talking about here this morning. Job's friends and one stranger. Isn't that kind of odd? Just a stranger shows up and says, I've been kind of listening in, and I think I have an opinion on this. Anybody guilty of that? Offering your opinion when it wasn't asked for, and you're not even involved? Yep. The epilogue of the book where God comes in a storm and speaks, and Job responds, and God rewards. We talked about the poetry part, but the things again, as we dive off into this pool of advice that goes back and forth, before we dive into that, some reminders that, without this book, we would understand so much less about these things, God's throne room and the activity of angels and the power he's given angels, but it's his power, not theirs, and there's a mystery there. The work and intent of Satan and how he prowls for us. He's looking for us. This little dog we've got at home, he's about a year old. Man, I can hardly get him to go outside in the dark. We've got bobcats and even a mountain lion that visits around our place, and I think he knows and he can smell and he can sense, and he is scared to death. And man, I have to go out there with a flashlight and trying to walk him so I go to the bathroom. But he knows that there's something prowling out there that could eat him up. And he even hears there's an owl that hangs out in these pine trees, and that owl could carry him off. He's but about 4 pounds. It's half the size of a rabbit. And so, the understanding the work and intent of Satan, how Satan prowls like that, and we better stay pretty close to God and stay in the light, because the darkness is a scary place. And understanding our relationship with God, the worth of a blameless and upright life, we talked about how that means integrity and just. It doesn't mean he was sinless. It doesn't mean he had good posture. Seeing God's action in leading Job into temptation, we looked at how Jesus prays, our Father who art in heaven, and hallowed be your name. And he teaches people how to pray, but in the middle of that he says, lead us not into temptation. Jesus knows this is something God does. And we don't get to decide whether that's fair or not, do we? We don't get to decide if it's fair or right that God uses temptation, that he lets Satan get in the middle of our choices we make, and we choose God, and we choose God, and we choose God. And that's the power. That's really what love is. Love is choosing when somebody's not making you, you're choosing to. And so observing how friends can be partially right, but can be wrong, and really humbly understanding our place in God's creation. And really, lastly, the whole book is about trust. And so, we finished chapter 1. These words, Job understood what was allowed through Satan. He says, naked I came from my mother's womb in chapter 1, verse 21. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And there's verse 22, in all this Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. We just begin to understand some of what Job understood in this moment. And as we face trials in life, we want to come to the same place. Well, in chapter 2, God allows Satan into the throne room again. There's a pattern that angels come before God, I guess on some kind of regular basis. And Satan, God points out again, have you seen how Job has handled this? You took his stuff, you took his family, you took everything he had, and he remains true to me. And Satan uses this term in chapter 2, verse 4. God, though you incited him, God says, a man who fears God and shuns evil, he maintains his integrity though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. So that's a little bit of a clarity on where that power came from. Satan did it, but you incited me against him to ruin him without reason. And Satan says, skin for skin. Can you see those words? In your Bible, what does that little short sentence look like? Mine has an exclamation point after it. I mean, Satan is standing before God, and he's barking back in his face, saying, skin for skin. Can you imagine the rebellion to stand before God and utter words that are short and sharp and harsh and accusatory? That's what he is. Satan's the accuser. That's what his name means. He's constantly accusing before God. Skin for skin. And then he says, a man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. Do you see there? I mean, anybody else in the room always thought that Satan did all the harm? I had glossed over the fact that the power is coming from God. All power is coming from God. And he's saying Satan knows he can't touch him, right? The angels can't do anything without God's okay. And whenever it talks about in the Old Testament, angels, the angel of death coming over a population and wiping out a nation that's an enemy of Israel in one night, that's power is not coming from that angel. The angel's getting it done, but that power comes from God, and that's harsh. That's hard for us today to read that and understand that. But, these are rebellious words, and really there's a lot of discussion about what skin for skin means. Anybody in here studied that or have an opinion on it? Basically, I think that next line makes it clear. He's saying, anybody can be good if you just have what they have and the people around them, but you start messing with him and his body, you start hurting him, as Jesse started mentioning, you're going to see him lose that integrity. You're going to see him lose that justness that you keep holding him up as being an example of. And then I think it's interesting where he says skin for skin. It's a little bit of if you read scholars on sort of a proverb, it's sort of a slang term. Have you ever heard anybody saying, well, he just wants to save his own skin? You've heard that term. We use that way. When somebody says that, do we mean just the stuff that covers their body? When you say he's just out to save his own skin? His own life, really. We use the skin kind of in that weird colloquialism that we voice to use to mean his whole life. But look and God says, okay, skin only, or basically you can hurt the body, but you can't kill him. And Jesse's saying, read about how Job wishes that he had. The suffering can be so severe that you think it's just not worth it. I'd rather I was dead. But anyways, it ends up being skin, and kind of poetically here, that's what he afflicts, right? Satan says skin for skin, so God does the afflicting. He afflicted his skin and put sores all over him. And so, I think there's lots of references to this. And some even say, there's references in through the Bible, in through these chapters. I believe it's in chapter 30, verse 30 maybe. Let's turn there. We'll jump ahead. Yeah. Job 30, verse 30. Where would you start? You can go on up a little farther. I'll start in verse 24. Surely no one lays a hand on a broken man when he cries out for help in his distress. Have I not wept for those in trouble? Have my soul not grieved for the poor? Yet when I hoped for good, evil came. When I looked for light, then came darkness. The churning inside me never stops. Days of suffering confront me. I go about blackened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I have become a brother of jackals, a companion of owls. My skin grows black and peels. My body burns with fever. He literally tells you that his skin isn't just covered with sores. It's so diseased, it's turning black. Anybody ever understand what happens when your skin's turning, if you've got, pale skin and it's turning black? What's wrong with it? What's it doing? It's dying, As a veterinarian, I have to work on animals that had road burns or whatever, and sometimes we'll try and sew things up. We don't know how much blood supply that it's got, but when it's about to, if it didn't regain life and get good blood flow, it's turning black and falling off. And a lot of folks would say what fits with this is a really horrible instant onset case of leprosy. And you'll read a lot in here, he'll talk about the worms. Well, what do you think the worms are? Any opinions? There you go. Yeah, I'm a veterinarian, I've seen that. You get a worm, the flies are all over you, they start laying eggs. It was a disaster. He was a mess. This is disgusting. I hope you didn't just eat a donut out there, but he had sores on him. He's got maggots crawling in the sores. Actually, they kind of do some good. We all know that story. They can clean a wound, but this guy is really miserable. He's hurting, and so really, I think that skin part is important because God is saying, it's the second test. From the second accusation from Satan, but he says if you can lose all you got, but you start hurting somebody's body and you put them in physical misery, then they'll walk away from God, or they'll at least lose their integrity towards you and start cursing you. Wasn't that the thing that his wife said, Job just curse God and die. That was the helpful advice from the spouse. Yeah.
When I think of that, I think of all the prayers I said for Melba. Whatever, just take away the pain.
Just take away the pain. Yep.
When I read that, when I first read that, I thought, why would she say that? But yes, I know why she said
You know
it. You
it.
don't want to see your spouse suffering.
Yep, we have been, many of us have been by somebody's side who had pain that was out of control and went on and on and on. And we would be right there with his wife and say, curse God and die. And yet that's not a path that we can take. That's not a path we can take. Really, I think we've spent enough on that, but here as we get to the end of chapter 2, it says Job's 3 friends show up. And when Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all his troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes, and they met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. How long do you think this took? They didn't have cell phones, so how long do you think it took for those random 3 friends heard about his suffering? Think the news went from town to town? Were there people, there were no Pony Express? Nobody riding full tilt on a pony, swapping out for fresh ones from town to town? How long do you think it took for his friends to hear about his suffering? Yeah, it could be weeks to months between him and them. And then on top of that, it doesn't say they jumped on those camels and had a race to get there. They had to communicate with each other to some extent because they met together by agreement. So the friends took the time to send messengers between each other. It'd be kind of like, the texts we got on James Moore last night. The texts were bouncing around in seconds. Do you think it took seconds for them to communicate with each other? I don't think so. So and not only that, but they met somewhere by agreement, and then they decided they'd go and sympathize with him and comfort him. So I guess there's an important point here. How long do you think Job was suffering? Yep. Yeah, Jesse says months. Charles said years. If it was a week, it probably felt like years. but yeah, the reality of this is it was a long time. You think, if you just read through this quickly, sometimes it's easy to jump over the fact that he was suffering for a long time. I mean, anybody's here has been, like I said, I've been run over and crushed, 6-8 weeks maybe, and then you're back up and you're rolling again. Hip replacement, knee replacement, pick out whatever you've been through. Sometimes you're down for a while, but you get back up. But these sores, this pain went on and on and on, and we don't know. There's some people who say years, but the book is interesting, still set in the East. So we get into the body of the book. That's the end of that prologue. And then there's the body, and there's the epilogue. And the body itself is chapters 3 through 31. So basically 27 chapters of people talking back and forth. Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. That's one of the first things. Chapter 3, verse 1. Well, I guess I'll start here. Says, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. He said, and that's interesting. Chapter 3, verse 2 is only 2 words. Everybody says the shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept. Well, right there in Job 3:2, he said, maybe it's shorter. But Verse 3, may the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said a boy is born. A lot of people would say that really is conceived there. That day may it turn to darkness. May God not care about it. May no light shine upon it. And it goes on and on. So Job opened his mouth and started in. And then in 4:1, Eliphaz says, if someone ventures a word with you, and then 6:1, Job replied, and then 8:1, then Bildad the Shuhite replied, and then 9:1, Job replied, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. There's 3 rounds of discussions, and eventually this bystander, Elihu, steps in, and he wants to throw his opinion into the mix. Well, part of the reason I've spent so much time on these first couple of chapters, and we're going to spend a lot of time on the last chapters, on the epilogue, the ending of Job, is it's a little bit difficult in a class setting to get through these 27 chapters reading one after another. But I'm going to encourage you here in these next few weeks, these next 3 or 4 weeks, to take them in chunks. And so the plan is, and I guess I need to finish this thought, but the plan is that we're going to cover maybe 9 or 10 chapters a week. And I want you to maybe get a piece of paper and write down some things that speak to you from that chunk of discussions. And we'll cover it in class. So here, in part of this going around, I'm jumping back and forth a little bit, but in Job 33:1, that the guy who's not even a friend, right? Well, we don't have evidence that he's a friend, but he's a young man. The others, it does say he's younger, and he steps up, and I mean, he has a pretty belligerent attitude. Job, listen to my words, pay attention to everything I say. I'm about to open my mouth. The words are on the tip of my tongue. My words are from an upright and just heart. Wow. Wow. What is this? I put on here, sounds like a parent speaking to a child. Look, have anybody ever tried to get a kid's attention and said, look at me, and the kid is, blah, blah, blah. Nope, look at me. I'm trying to talk to you. Read my lips. You've heard that before. And then Elihu goes on in 32, 33, all the way through 37. He goes on and on and on. The guy who sort of stepped up and wasn't one of the 3 friends. And even in 33, 31, at the end, pay attention to me, Job, and listen to me. Be silent, and I will speak. If you have anything to say, answer me, speak up, for I want you to be cleared. But if not, listen to me, be silent, and I'll teach you wisdom. And then 34, 36, oh, that Job might be tested to the utmost. In other words, he's wishing that he got hurt and tested more than he's been through. I think there's a reason he's listed as not one of the friends. Anyways, he's definitely off the rails. For answering like a wicked man. To his sin, he adds rebellion. And obviously, we see multiple times in there, with all that Job said, he did not sin. So I think there's just some stuff in here that's powerful to me and useful to me, and lots of opinions and lots of advice. But I'm kind of getting at, anybody, you get to a genealogy, anybody guilty of skipping over that? Me? Not anymore. As you get a little older, but you get in there and you see this list of begat, and you kind of read the first one, and then you say, okay, we're moving to the end, and you read the last one, and then you just move on, right? Well, there's depth there, and there's meaning there, and there's little hints and clues there that we're jumping over, and I think that's part of it. I get a little bit of this biblical ping pong. It's like, friend Job, friend Job, friend Job, and you go back and forth, and a lot of the language is sort of similar, but it's poetry, and that's why I was pointing out at the beginning. There's some depth to this, and You find times in your life when you've felt these feelings or said these words. John?
One of the things there that I was taught in a class, the book of Job, is to start in with chapter 3 and watch how far down he goes and see how it goes, but then look for where he starts coming back up.
Yep.
It goes down slow and it comes back up slow also.
Yeah, Chuck says, read through this and through the poetry of it, see the heart of Job, a man who God, why did all this, where did it start? The angels are coming before God into his throne room on what appears to be a regular basis, and there's other places in the Bible that talk about that. But he says, Satan, where have you been? He knew where Satan had been. I know God watches Satan and keeps an eye on him all the time. But he says, where have you been? And he says, I've been wandering. He knows what. He didn't even say in this verse what he was looking for, to devour souls like a lion. But he says, where have you been? And then he says, have you seen Job? Okay, have you seen Marcia? Let me hold her up. And at that point, you're thinking, there's none like him. This is the best I got. This is the human who has chosen me in the best way. Were there other humans who chose God in good ways on earth? You bet. You can hear through his friends how much they praise and respect the Creator. There's beauty in what they have to say about God. But God says, what about this one? Here you go. I'm going to let you have at him. And when you figure out what you want to do, I'm actually the one who's going to do it to him. And let's see what happens. Wow. Wow. When Jesus says, lead us not into temptation, that's not just a little trite, rote, habitual saying that Jesus has for him. Where had Jesus been before he started his ministry? In temptation. Before he even gets to start his walk, what was it, Matthew chapter 4, here it is, yeah. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. And Jesus responds with a scripture. And Satan tempts him again, and Jesus responds with a scripture. It is written, it is written, it is written. And so Jesus knew temptation. His was 40 days. And he wasn't afflicted in his flesh yet, was he? But it was coming. You think it'd be worse to know it's coming? Job didn't know the sores were coming on, right? They just hit him. They just hit him. But Jesus knew the cross was coming from the time that he spoke the world into existence. And so I think it's probably, for me, it would certainly be worse to know the suffering is coming. Well, that's a little bit of what life is like. And so we get a little bit of a hint through the book of Job and through seeing Jesus' temptation that trouble's going to come. And your trouble, I'm sorry for it. And it may be worse than I've endured. But God is good, and I'll come and sit with you. And that we see this action at the end of chapter 2 When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud. They were crying when they saw him, before they even got close to him. And it does say from a distance. If he had leprosy, that would kind of make sense. They tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads, and they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. That's the kind of friend you need. The kind of friend that, for me, laying there, I'd been running by a truck, brought me a banana split. They should have brought him a banana split here, I'm just saying. If there was a Brahms nearby, they messed up. They should have brought him a banana split. But sometimes you don't need a lot of advice when you're having trouble. You want to offer it. You want to fix it, especially men. Are men fixers? When there's a relationship discussion, they want to say, let's fix that, and then I can go on and watch the football game. Or whatever, you know. I think men are guilty of being fixers. They want to fix it. They want to say with their words what you need to do, and then they're wash their hands of it, and good luck with that. Well, as friends, and there's good lessons in here for men especially, I think. Don't try and be a fixer all the time. Just sit. And so our plan really is, look for these beautiful words by Job and his friends. There's a lot of wrong logic in here, a wrong view of God and his will and his actions, but don't let that get in between you and what God has for you here. So your homework really is to read chapters 3 through 10 for the next week. I'd encourage you to really do that. Get a piece of paper and read these and look for, like Chuck said, that slow descent. I don't know how slow it is. The very first words of his mouth are, may the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said above. Yeah. I mean, he is not watering it down. Has anybody ever, I've felt pretty low in my life in a few times, but I've never cursed the day of my birth. Anybody done that? I haven't done that yet. I don't know. I hope. What's that? I wasn't even smart to think of that. I don't know. Maybe that's sort of the godliness and wholeness of Job, and he's saying, before I could get so bad that I would curse God, as wifey just said, or before I get that bad, I would rather not have lived. Maybe that's the goodness in him saying those words. He's saying, I've suffered so much, I don't want to lose the relationship with my God. I don't want to curse him. I don't want to be unjust or be fractured by all of this. It'd be better if I hadn't even been born. Don't we know, some in this room maybe have had a child die before it was born or shortly after birth, losing a baby. The huge comfort you have in that, in knowing that child never experienced hurt and pain and suffering and struggled against life, and in its innocence went straight to heaven. These old paintings you have, I showed some at the beginning class, like classical painters, they'll paint God on his throne, and he's got a big white beard. He always has a good head of hair for some reason. I don't know. I feel like maybe I need to paint some of those paintings. But big, God, and he's in charge. He's all there, and then there's little babies around in the picture. You know what I'm talking about? They look like little cupids or whatever. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's real. Maybe because there's little babies. They went straight to heaven. Didn't pass go. Didn't collect $200 in the game of Monopoly. They went straight to heaven. And the one piece you have in that is knowing that. But I just wonder if that's part of, as you read this book, listen to Job and see what he has to say. And look for words that you struggle with or verses you don't understand, and we'll have a chance to talk about those in class. I really would like to discuss these things. Some that pop to my head. Blessed is the man whom God corrects. So do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. Is that easy to say? It's easy to say when you're not experiencing it, right? If you're one of the three friends and it's Job who's getting smote, you want to say, blessed is the man whom God corrects. And so is it true, but also is it maybe sometimes not the right thing to say to somebody? Have any of us been guilty of that? I have. Said something that was true, but shouldn't have been said at that time. Anybody else guilty of that? I could raise my hand multiple times. The truth doesn't always need to be said right now. Even Jesus with the woman at the well, did he start off with, all of her sin? Well, he does get into it, but really more, he starts off with, I got good stuff for you. I got good stuff for you, living water. In Job 13:15, anybody remember this passage? Though he slay me, yet while I hope in him, I will surely defend my ways to his face. A little bit of that's kind of interesting. A lot of people read John 3:16, right? What does John 3:16 say? Yeah. How can it get better than that? But then you read the rest of it, you take it, the rest of the context. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe in him stands condemned already, because he's not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds may be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be seen plainly that what he has done has been done through God. Beautiful passage, John 3:16. But if you don't read the rest of it, you really miss out, right? I mean, there's an edge to it. There's a if this, then that. And if you just read John 3:16, you don't get the if this, then that part. And that's what we get in Job 13:15. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. But then he says, I will surely defend my ways to his face. That's interesting language. I'd encourage you to read that and sort of study about what that means. Man born of woman is of a few days and full of trouble. I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a girl. That's, men are visual creatures, and this is a passage that a lot of men's retreats will say, hey, you young men, you control your eyes. I'm not saying women were without sin, but I'm just saying there's passages in the Bible that a person can pull up and remember that give them strength in a moment. And so there's a lot of passages in the book of Job that are kind of quotable. And then we talked a little bit about, chapters 34 and sitting in sores and some, I think Jesse pointed out in chapter 7, it was at least months. So you see things in there that give you better understanding about the book of Job, and understanding more for your life and for me, for my life, what these books of Job have for me. And I want to get over that young man who read all this when I was young and thought, man, what a crybaby. Get over it, buddy. Bad things happen to people. Move on. Is that harsh? Well, yeah, it is. And it's harsh. That I felt that when I was young just was an indication that I hadn't lived long enough to see hurt and see suffering and see that this is a we're going to sort of get into this. We're going to talk about God at the end. He brings up, he says, have you considered Leviathan and Behemoth? This is a wild and crazy world that I created, and it isn't always easy, and it's not always safe. And you need to get yourself right and get your understanding right about being a man or woman of God. It's not going to be without risk and without trouble and without trial, but I've got you. I've got you. And he says that over and over again. I've got you. And that's the message we want to get from Job. So, well, we'll quit a couple of minutes early. Let's have a prayer before we close. God, we bow at the end of this lesson asking you to open our eyes and humble us with however you need to help us to have an understanding of you, to let go of self and the way we think things ought to be and what we think is fair, and just trust you. And God, it's a peaceful thing and a beautiful thing when we let go of all of that, because we know that life brings trouble and hurt. Even if it's not in our lives, it can be people close to us, but eventually it'll get around to us. And when those times come, help us to not listen to that tempter, to not listen to Satan, the liar, but listen to you and find out what your word really does say for us. God, we want to stay close to you and stay whole and stay just like Job did, even when life beats us up, because we know that it's good to be in the palm of your hand and that you will always rescue us. Help us to feel the peace and joy that brings and share that with others, because we know there's folks out in the world that don't have anything to fall back on, and when troubled times come, they just have to suffer. But we know that we don't, and we're thankful for that. So, God, we praise you, and we'll, in this next hour, praise you. Praise things in Jesus' name. Amen.